And we'll be hearing from many voices tonight from right across Australia. And here in the Referendum Centre, we're first joined by the Voice and Referendum correspondent, Dan Borsche. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
And 730's Chief Political Correspondent, Laura Tingle. Great to see you, Laura.
Hi, Richard.
We're also joined by the Director of Yes23, Dean Parkin, and Liberal MP Keith Wallahan, who opposed the model put forward at the referendum. Welcome to you both. Dean, let me kick off with you. We're at the end of the campaign, essentially now. We're yet to see the first numbers come in. What are you realistically expecting tonight?
David, we're really keen to see the numbers come in. I mean, we've been at this process, this campaign for recognition and for the voice for many decades, particularly in the last 6.5 years since the Uluru Statement from the Heart was issued to the Australian people. So we're actually just keen to see those numbers come in rather than preempt or hypothesise. There's been a lot of that speculation throughout this campaign, and I think we've earned the right at the end of this very arduous campaign in some regards to wait and see until those numbers come in before we start making assessments about where the votes might fall.
And Keith, what about you? What are you anticipating? Are you going to call it for no?
Oh, I think we'll wait and see what the result is. That the Prime Minister had a mandate to put this question. There's no doubt about that, and that's why he led with that in his acceptance speech. But the mandate for the answer lies with the people, and while they're still voting, we need to respect that. I think there's a temptation for one side maybe to have engage in hubris, but we must all show humility and respect for the result. One of the things I kept hearing today and through the week was that a lot of people said, I wish there were two questions on the ballot paper. One for recognition and one for the voice. I think that's something that I heard again and again and really drove a lot of people's results today.
I might come back to that idea and where we go from here once we do see some results.
Keith, I'm wondering from you, you were out on some polls this week and talking to people. What was the sense you got from Australians on what they made of this debate and the proposal put to them at this referendum?
I think a lot of people, unlike a federal election where they're very quick to give you their opinion about what they think of you and your leader, a lot of people walked in there very quietly. There wasn't the usual taking of how to vote cards, which makes sense. You don't need much instruction to write yes or no. But people did it quietly and they did it politely. I was worried earlier on there would be tension and maybe some violence, and we saw some little bits of that today. But largely, people were polite, they bought each other coffees and they were kind to each other. And that gave me hope that whatever the result tonight, we can come through this as a nation. Interesting
to hear from Warren Mundine. Keith, let me come to you. PK talking to Warren Mundine there about some of the messages from the No campaign. I think clearly the message they landed on as an effective message towards the end was that this would divide, the voice would divide Australia by race. Is that a line that, or an argument that you agree with?
It is. You can split hairs about the difference between race and ancestry and indigeneity, but I think it's an argument without a difference. I think people know what we mean. Of course, there's a race power within the Constitution. It's an outdated term that we find distasteful today. But when you swap that with indigeneity or ancestry, I think people know it means the same thing to them, and it is about equality. That's what it feels for people. And there's a reason I think that was one of the #1 reasons for people to vote no. And I think it's a seductive argument that is not just one that you can agree with your head, but also your heart. And a good example of that is citizenship ceremonies. When we speak as members at citizenship ceremonies, we tell everyone there we are all equal Australians, 100%. That's an argument that people understand, and I think it was relevant in this vote.
But if that's your argument, was there ever any sort of wording or detail around the voice that would have solved that issue? Wouldn't even every detail that you were demanding about how the voice might work still have left that fundamental concern you've got that it divides us by race?
It would. And so
the detail argument was what, a furphy?
No, it's not a furphy. And a good comparison is the same-sex marriage plebiscite. There was detail on the table for that. There was a bill, there was two bills.
You're saying that wouldn't matter?
It would matter, and let me give you an example. I was the Deputy Chair of the Joint Select Committee. If we had a bill, we could have compared that against the model to see if it was actually fit for purpose for the model, to see if it had the boundaries that were needed to have a bill like that.
But it still would have, in your view, divided us by race.
On that issue, but for some people, detail was important. For some people, there was many other issues that were important, including legal risk.
I'm asking for you, would the detail really have mattered, have solved that problem of dividing us?
Well, the #1 issue for me was legal risk, and I'm happy to talk about that as well. And let's not forget that we were asking Australians to vote on a model, a particular model. That's what we're asking Australians to do. We didn't have a constitutional convention. We had a 5-day hearing where only 2 of those days were devoted to legal experts and legal risk. That's what we put to the Australian people, and we shouldn't forget that. It wasn't just about recognition and listening. All reasonable Australians agree with those 2 ideas, but we put a model to them and they voted on that model.
But if you did accept that a proposal to put a recognition statement in the Constitution, for example, would that have been acceptable to you?
Definitely.
Then why not, if you're deciding to recognise Aboriginal people as the first peoples of the country, then don't they get a say in the matters that affect them? Shouldn't they have some sort of say on the kind of constitutional change that they want?
No doubt, no doubt. But democracy is about compromise. It just is. And democracy is about compromise in so many different ways. In order to win the vote, in order to earn the trust of the Australian people, I think a constitutional convention could have put that compromise on the table. We could have talked about it. And I don't want to write the result off. We've yet to get the results in. But I think it was a misstep by the Prime Minister not having a proper constitutional convention and putting the detail forward for us to assess it.
Well, Keith, as we were just speaking there about the diversity of voices across Australia and the people we've heard from urban, regional, remote communities, how does a government or ministers listen to those diversity of voices if there's no representative structure?
No, it's a very good question. I'm a new member of the House of Representatives. I'm one of 151. Our core job is listening. For example, in my electorate a week ago, I had 20 listening posts, 10 in that weekend and 15 in another. That's where it all starts. Deans, we've met in Canberra, and I hope whatever happens tonight, we keep doing that, because I really valued your contribution in this campaign, and when we met in private. I think we need to do our job, and if there's anyone in the House of Representatives or the Senate who's not listening to Indigenous Australians, I'd love to know who they are, because there's goodwill across all sides.
Wouldn't it be easier to do with a voice structure, to bring in all those diversity of communities that are concerned about common issues?
Of course it's one way, but it doesn't have to be in the Constitution. That's what the whole point is. We're here for a referendum voting on a particular model.
So you could legislate it?
Of course you can. Of course
and you'd be happy with that?
Well, you know, I'm not going to announce policy here
just what you think
tonight, but the idea of listening is a good one. No reasonable person disagrees with that.
The idea of legislating a voice?
Well, of course, but the focus should be on the grassroots, because that's where the most disadvantage is, and that's where the most work has to be done.
What does that mean when you say that the focus should be on the grassroots? What do you mean?
Well, we know we're a federation, and we know that the closer you are to your community, the more context you have, and the better you can deliver results that are appropriate for that community. The Indigenous community in Healesville is quite different from the Indigenous community in Alice Springs. That's why it's important to recognise that diversity and listen to the groups within those areas.
To play devil's advocate, isn't that a voice?
Of course it is, but again, to come back to it, it's about a model to amend the Constitution, not just a model, a new chapter. A new chapter, remember the Parliament, the Executive and the courts have their own chapters. It's got 3 parts. We haven't talked much about that tonight, and we didn't talk much about it in the committee that I was Deputy Chair of. I think that's one of the reasons we are where we are.
We'll go over to you, Keith Wilhan, some final observations very quickly before we go to news headlines on what we're seeing tonight.
Yeah, I've said it a few times tonight, but we should never forget that tonight is about a change to the Constitution and particular words that were put to people. We heard from some of the people in Tasmania reference equality and detail. There will be reflections later on in the coming days, but I think it was a significant mistake not to have a constitutional convention. I'm confident you would have brought, if there was compromise, more Liberals in the Parliament, more people in the community, and you would have had more people out there arguing for it. And I think we will reflect on that maybe there was hubris from the Aston by-election, which coincided in the exact moment that we were having that Joint Select Committee.
Dean Parkin, before we let you go as well, it's not looking good for the Yes campaign from here. Any final thoughts?
Look, I think we always knew that this was going to be tough. As I said, I'm incredibly proud of the efforts that has been put in across the board. And I think, you know, this question of division has been raised a few times
we heard it there.
by the No campaign, and I've got a lot of respect for Keith. And I think we all need to think about these next couple of days very deeply. And I think that if the No campaign that has run hard on ending division, then particularly the parliamentarians that are party to that cause now have a very solemn duty to make sure that the days that follow are not characterised by further political point scoring and further division, that every effort, and particularly our parliamentarians who will be commenting on this in the next couple of days, and particularly in that next sitting week in Canberra, that there is a concerted and decent effort to make sure that the sentiment and commentary from here on is about unifying and bringing the country together. If the no case stands for ending division, then it needs to live by those words and conduct itself in a way that signals very strongly to Australia that we've got to bring the country together.
A really important message, and the respect that clearly the two of you have for each other is appreciated as well. But right now, with 2 states voting no, well, this is all but over for the Yes campaign, you'd have to say. But of course, we'll wait and see the actual results as they come in. But a difficult start indeed to the count tonight for the Yes side.
More counts to come as we continue into the night. We want to say thank you to Keith Wilhan and to Dean Parkin. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.